Inspired by poetry.
Let's give it some lip.
Ta-da.
Welcome, everyone. I hope that you are well. Thanks for joining us. As always, I'm Jenna, and I'm here with TB.
Happy to be here.
Oh, more than happy, because it's not just us this week. We've got Jane Frank with us.
Hi, it's so amazing to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Oh, it's so great to have you as well. Tell us a little bit about you and how poetry has become a force for good, hopefully, in your life.
Yeah, poetry is definitely a force for good. I mean, I sort of feel, it sounds a bit cheesy, but I feel when I'm writing poetry, I'm, moving closer towards my best self,
Nice.
Because the days I write are the days that I'm happiest. And I think it's something that's sort of really become more and more important to me, particularly over the last 10 years or so.
Mm.
I mean, I was always one of those kids that loved to write poetry and illustrate it, and I think we're all a bit like that when we're kids. We're, unstoppable in terms of creativity. And during the high school years, again, English was really important to me. But, you go through years where there's just not a lot of that. Well, I did. And also, the years when my children were young, there wasn't a lot of time for creativity. But it's something that sort of, I think during my PhD years, when I was so busy with that project, I just used to sort of fill corners of time with poetry, and that's when it got back in, under my skin again.
Oh, so it almost became like a therapeutic,
Definitely,
release for you during those stressful times.
Absolutely.
And I think that's very common, that life can drown out creativity
exactly
at different times.
Yeah.
But what's wonderful is that spark never leaves. And you just have to, get that flame broiling again, and then...
And you find it.
You do.
Or it finds you,
Or it
right?
finds
Maybe
you.
that it finds you again.
Yeah, it finds you. That certainly was my experience. And then
Yeah.
once it's sort of burning, it's really hard to stop, and you kind of, it's the way you look at things, and it becomes very important to the way, you experience everyday life.
Yeah.
and find meaning in things as well. So,
Yeah.
and explain things. Make sense of the world.
Someone described me as being very reflexive, and I think it's poetry that does that for me, because I'm always thinking about these things and always thinking about them as I relate it to my own life. But I heard this rumor that you try to write daily. So is that true? And how do you do it?
Well, actually, it's funny because some days I can't write. I mean, I try and write every day. Sometimes it just doesn't find
Yeah.
me, and other days it does. But, as I said, the more I can write, the happier I am. So I think there's definitely a close nexus for me anyway, between poetry and being well,
Yeah.
really well and really enjoying life and feeling fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's interesting, the daily writing, because I think Stephen King talks about this as well, that idea that when you write, you find things. Like it's a excavating process.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
His book is amazing.
You don't come to it with something in mind, but you write and you find your way through, and you can uncover cities of gold and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so do you reckon for you and your poetry that rings true?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the more you write and it becomes part of who you are, the more likely you are to find wonderful things to say. So unless you write, unless you make that part of your daily routine, well, not daily, but it doesn't have to be daily. Sometimes it can just be, a couple of times a week. I know I've got a very good friend, Damon O'Brien, who's a poet, lives at Wynnum, and he really only writes on the weekends. He was saying at his book launch recently that that's his, he really, has a huge outpouring of writing on the weekend because he has a very busy day job. So there's no rhyme nor reason to how it works for different people. But for me, I do find if I can find a corner of my day, and I do always think of it as a corner of my day, and I can get a poem to work, it's just a magical thing. Like it just feels like a day's complete.
Yeah. So poetry for me helps me sift through complexity, because it gets me to see things quite differently as I start exploring from one line to the next. Like Stephen King, you burrow through and you see the mining of the gold there, but it's not always obvious on the surface what it starts out to be. So how do you is that a similar process for you? Is that you start is it a gold mine? Is it can you see more sometimes? Does it help you to sift through some of the complexities?
I mean, some of the ways I like to think about poems, I do think of them as souvenirs of experience. So I think of them as sort of almost like postcards, that tell, each one captures something about the past, the present, the future even. So it becomes a bit like a tapestry woven together of your own DNA of who you are, which I kind of like that analogy of how it feels to me. But, I also like Adrienne Rich talks about poetry as being an electric current that runs through things. And I also think that's it. It's about how you sort of process ideas, and it's how you make sense of the world. And if you didn't have that electrical current, you wouldn't necessarily see it in the same way. So I think poetry makes you purposeful in a way about how you walk around and look at things. So, mindfulness has become sort of one of those overused kinds of words, but poetry makes us more mindful because when I'm writing, I feel sort of like it's waking up my emotions. Yeah. So that's what I love about it.
And I really love the term purposeful. When I teach writing, whether it's poetry or prose or any form at all, I talk about purposeful crafting. You get your story out, but then you go back and you play around with the diction and the syntax and all of the techniques that you might want to bring forth. And when I was reading your poetry, I was thinking about your turn of phrase and some of the ways that you put words together that just resonate in a different way. They hit different.
Yeah, they do. And I noticed with the writing of your poems that I've read is that it's personalized in some way that is so uniquely you. Like, I don't know that it could be written by someone else. Whereas there's a lot of distance between when I write, I'm like the journalist on the outside telling a story about something else or someone else. But I've noticed there's something about yours that is so personal and intimate for me that I feel like with everything I read, I've learned something about you.
Thank you.
Is it purposeful? But I don't know. That's what I've come through.
I'll take that as a compliment.
But it is a compliment because
thank you.
Not a lot of people share that much, and I feel like I get to know you with each piece.
I sort of feel like you've got to put yourself out there and you've got to take a risk with it, because unless you're willing to, it is a risk to do that because you're confiding. So, confessional poetry is like that. I do think some of it's a bit confessional, but, that's, I sort of feel unless I'm doing that, I'm only pretending.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's one of the observable things for me is that as I read more, I say, I think I get to know Jane a little bit more. She's just told me the secret. I'm the best friend. She just whispered to me, right? So, which I think is very good. I think it's really great when you can be that intimate with the words, and your soul is on it, being exposed at the same time. So, firstly, thank you for that, because I feel like you've shared so much through the writing. What I read.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Tammy. That's great. Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's good. Yeah. I had a question about your first foray into either poetry competitions or publishing. And what's led you into, because I think a lot of people write poetry. Yeah. But what led you into Ready to Share?
I've got a couple of very good, poetry friends. I call them my poetry whisperers,
yes.
Who were very sort of helpful to me when I started writing, more seriously. Yeah. Just kind of, sort of reinforcing that idea that there's nothing to be lost. Yeah. There's nothing to wait for. Yeah. Just send it out. The worst thing that can happen is it gets rejected.
Yeah. And you're no worse off than you were before you sent it in.
No. And I say that to students too. Same. I say to them, don't wait. Send now, because if you're lucky you'll get some feedback, and if you're not, you'll just know. But you've always got to remember it's a very subjective thing, that not every editor is going to like your work, but that it's a numbers game. If you send enough poems out, someone will connect with your ideas, and I do think that will happen eventually. So I say to students, don't wait around, don't wait and wonder. Yeah. Because I think I probably waited too long,
So I think that's a maturity that comes over time. Because I remember my first poetry class that I ever took, I was a sophomore in college, and I got feedback. I'm like, how dare you tell me something
that
about
is my
writing
on a page?
And I was so offended. That was my last poetry class.
A lot of poetry careers have ended like that.
I just couldn't deal with it. And I just said to her, she says, but you're such a good writer. I'm like, yeah, but I'm just not a good sharer. Because I'm like, how can you tell me how I see the world? So I think it takes a bit of maturity. Now I'm okay. Like now you can give me feedback, but then I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
I think it is a state of mind that you sort of think, look, I have these poems. I would love to share them with people. I'm going to send them out. Some people won't want them. Other people will. And it's just kind of making a decision and coaching yourself that, it's nothing to do with you in a way, although we can always improve. There is always making our poems stronger. There is always, finding new ways and things to write about and different approaches to take because, we don't want our poems to get too samey. Right. There's no sort of recipe. You've got to keep on moving, changing, adapting. Yeah. But, and so you can really benefit from rejections. Yeah. If there's a message you need to receive, like you need to enliven this somehow, you need to do something differently. I don't think it's all bad.
Mm. Two things on that. It reminded me that your pieces, your style is so different. Is it almost though that the topic or the way that you're treating the topic demands the form? Yeah. Or do you have a form in mind and the poem kind of comes through? Because some are more prosy, some are very much more what we would call standard, typical alignments, but and some play around with both. Like they're amazing, but you don't. There's no way that anybody would fixate one type of style to you. No, which I love.
It's very diverse. I would agree with that. Yeah.
I do enjoy playing with form. I mean, I find that's part of the experimental sort of side of it that's really exciting. But I do find usually sort of a way of setting a poem out will present itself to me as part of almost it's as if the poem has its own shape and form. Yeah. And it is a strange thing that it kind of happens almost by osmosis, that the poem tells you what it needs to look like. Yeah. And it's just part of being in that zone, for me anyway. But I have been known to get to the end and finish a poem and think, I am going to change the form. I am going to play with it. But it's probably only 20% of poems that I do that with. I mean, 80% I'd say I keep the form that I started with. Yeah. But, which is interesting, I suppose, in some sort of way. I don't know. I don't know why. But it is kind of interesting that, some poems do demand a tweak at the end. Yeah. They sort of you need some work. Yeah.
So one of the things I thought about, because I think your poetry is great crafting of storytelling. Great crafting, and I always think of it like, is there a backstory? Is there a piece that she's going to write at some point that's going to give me the backstory to why this is happening now? Like, I almost see it as, how many of these sequels can you sell in the same story? Because I know you've sold me this one, but I always feel like, what's the backstory then? I always think of more to the life coach, like I'm going, it didn't start there, so where's the real beginning? So I don't know if that's done deliberately as a way of crafting your story and just teasing that out, or maybe that's just the story now, but have you thought that maybe there's another piece that could tell that can, or the foreshadowing of things as well? Because I look at it and I think, wow, I can see, and the form, the prosy form lends itself to that
very well.
Yeah. I mean, there's art's really important to me. I love writing about art. I've written a lot of ekphrastic poetry because I studied art history a long time ago, and it's part of I had a father who was an artist, and that was the talk at home, and I sort of feel that's a really big part of where I came from and who I am. But it's a real relief to sort of think about. I mean, I think of poetry and painting as very similar. So very, very similar forms, more so than short stories or novels. I think poetry and painting are closer. And I used to paint a lot, and I sort of sometimes I think it's almost a situation where you could either do a painting or write a poem. Do you know what I mean? And respond equally well to something.
And I think that's what I'm getting at with yours is I see the brushstrokes in the way that you put them together. Yeah. I just think it's phenomenal. I really do. I think it's
Jenna.
Yeah, no, I love. I've really been enjoying, and now you've given me another book to read through, so I'm so excited. Oh, thank you for that.
That's a pleasure.
Weekend read, thank you.
A weekend read, yes.
Yeah, but I do like writing about paintings, and there's just an endless number of paintings throughout history, particularly early 20th century art I love. But, equally there's a lot of contemporary art, and sometimes it's great to go to an exhibition or something like that. And you mightn't actually write anything at the time, but, it might come to you a couple of weeks later, just how that actually affected you. And it's nice to have an outlet for that. Yeah.
And I think that's that reflective process that you're talking about.
And it's a souvenir of my experience of going to the exhibition, which I kind of like because I can always remember it then.
That's what I was thinking about these too. Like you can always go back and I haven't read this one, but in the one, and each of those is a trigger then for that bigger memory that you hold.
Yeah, that's right. They are containers of memories. Yeah. I like that. That's nice, Jen.
Hey, well, let's have a listen to one. Which one would you like to share with us? Do you have a...
Well, I could start by reading the Paul Klee Life Coach poem, and then there's another poem that I thought I'd read as well.
Wonderful.
Okay. Paul Klee Life Coach. After bird comedy. I am pasting hieroglyph birds to my favourite tree, like he said. My goals are clearer. The leaves are glowing like a vision now. Like coral. I'm placing arrows to remind me of the child buried deep. The birds flew out of the cage this morning when the sun came up, and I followed. All day they have been laughing at palms, at windows, and now at the dark. How can I make these years meaningful? The best way is to add stars and butterfly wings, sails and steeples. That's what you do. Don't identify obstacles, avoid them. Good advice. Birds don't have to be brave to fly. Watch them. The air catches their imagination. They ignore trends and insults. Migrate to beautiful places where the trees are rose-coloured. Have a new set of birds for every day, you say. Keep smiling. Don't ever stop painting the birds.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, that I love it because it has this transcendentalism feel to it. Transcendentalism where we look at nature and we can find truths about our own lives and just the way that that's weaved in with the advice and the metaphor there of that birds don't have to be brave to fly. Yeah. Love that. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Paul Klee is an amazing artist. I mean, he's, endlessly, his works just, there's so many of them as well. And it's sort of, I think he's the guy that took a line for a walk, he said. So, take a poem for a walk.
Yeah, I like that.
But it's so good to see so much. Like you've looked at the art and you've managed to capture something much bigger than what you could see in the painting. This really extends it for me. It's like, this is just so expansive. It's like I felt like I was being blessed with a life coach, quite frankly. It's like this is a way to look at life a little bit differently.
Yeah. But looking at really good art will do that. Yeah. Like looking at a Paul Klee is like, I guess that's what I'm saying is like a life lesson. Yeah. And that's what really amazing artworks will do for us.
But not everyone will see it. So I think what you captured is what not everyone will see. A lot of people look at the painting and they'll go, yes, it's got a bit of nature and it's telling a story. But you've managed to capture something a little bit bigger than that, right? Mm-hmm. A way to use that in your own life.
Yeah, well, I think, there's lots of symbolism in his work as well. And I think those are definitely arrows that point us in directions that we can take away from the painting and use somehow ourselves. Yeah.
I've been doing some research on the observer effect. And this is mostly, I'm going to go nerdy for just a second. This is
not nerdy. It's good. Okay. Learn.
This is mostly ascribed to science. Like it came from them actually observing electrons, and the electrons only behaved a certain way when they were being watched. And I'm thinking about art that way. Like whether that is a painting or a poem and the observer effect. So like once we write something and we put it out there, we no longer
don't control it.
Have control over how it is observed and the perceptions that come across them. And so ekphrastic poetry is that way to kind of show one or multiple ways of viewing, ways of observing, and ways of relating, because observation is all about a relationship as well. Yeah. It's not just one way. It's also what that observation then means and changes. And I've been thinking about how art holds 3 temporal aspects at the same time, because in order to create any art, there has to be some sort of past experience that you write about in the present in the hopes that someone will view it in the future. And I'm really fascinated with that at the moment. And you've captured that.
So one of the beautiful things about this for me is like, you can look at something and what you see is, to Jenna's point, something in your past, it triggers something in your past, right? It could. But I love the fact, how can I make these years meaningful? The best way is to add stars and butterfly wings, sails, and steeples. So the wings, the sails, and the steeples, right, for me are just like, hey, go big, go bold, right?
I mean, navigating.
Or is that just me? I'm like, go big, go bold.
Navigating your 40s and 50s is a bit of a challenge, And I think we need strategies to work out how we're going to do this.
It wasn't on a treadmill or anything. It's not, go big, go bold. These are like, for a lot of people, those are symbols of, the nomadic experiences on a bucket list. And I thought, hey, how do I change life? My bucket list. I'm going to go big and bold.
I like that interpretation.
Yeah. But, so that was very meaningful for me. It's like the way we choose to see it. You look at the painting and you can see many different things, and who you are and your experiences can very much help to define that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is like positively defining how to have control. So it was a life coach was working, It was like, it's done its job and I'm in a good place and the future's clear. And that's why, like, there's a backdrop here and there.
Well, exactly. And I notice I choose a poem that has a very positive message because there are some poems that aren't quite as, like there are poems, where you have to, go through other emotions. So I feel it's good to start with a very positive.
That's good. Yeah. That's good.
But it's very good. Like, that's what I loved about it, is that we can see, and when I think of art and a lot of the art that I'm exposed to, it's very dark at the moment, and it's hard for me to see the light. It really is, because it's so dystopian and it's very dark and it's maybe the worst things, but it's to be able to find the essence of the meaning of life in a piece of art.
Definitely,
and what that life, the possibility of what the life could be. Because it could be many different things for many people, but this just brings out, how much we can learn from the art form and how much we as human beings can evolve as a result of that. So the this positive nature of that for me is, it was like, why don't we do this more? This should be the therapy that everyone has. Look at a piece of painting, look at a piece of writing, and get it together, people,
And I think that's a choice. That's a choice that any author makes when they come to a topic is for poetry especially, is what emotion do I want to kind of pull on? What strings do I want to bring together in order to create an emotional effect?
So every time I hear someone talking negatively now, I'm just going to go, hey, how about Coldplay?
Coldplay's a great place to start. Yeah. But I mean, I do like a lot of those artists from that time period because they were the rule breakers. Yeah. They were the ones that, we broke away from the photographic artworks and moved into the, breaking rules all over the place. And I think, a lot of people put off by poetry that's too regimented and they went to school and had poetry bashed into them. Yeah. And people say to me, why do you want to write that stuff? I mean, it's just awful. And I say, well, no, it doesn't have to be. There are no rules.
Exactly.
It's not like that.
That's right.
But even when it's dark and it is somewhat confronting, I feel like on the other side of that, I've been renewed. Because it's almost, for me, it's therapy. It gets you to go beyond that and you kind of like put it on paper and then you can move on from there. So it's kind of a release. So even when I read dark things, I'm going, okay, and now.
I think of poetry as an experience. You experience something and you're changed when you get to the end of it.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Now thinking about the one we just read there and I thought maybe we'll stay with the theme of birds. And I know you're working on a new one. Has this one been published anywhere?
It's just actually come out in a publication called Live Encounters, which is, it's an international journal. So, if you Google, Live Encounters and you'll find it there.
You'll find it there.
Yeah.
Well, do you mind reading this one to us too?
Absolutely not. Wild birds, Eagle Junction. The wild birds all leave my mind at once when the train moves from the platform. I lose myself in the archipelago of colour that is the city's sun wrapped in its river. Think to myself that if I travelled on this train every day, threading the suburbs on a line like beads, it might stop the birds from nesting, and the mornings might be light, whipped like buttercream. I try not to notice the wild birds through the window as they soar over the arc of the bridge in their low, elegant formations, but everything is easier at a distance. The train sways as if plunging underwater, and my head is drained empty. Only the gentle notifications about approaching stations and which side to disembark. They will be waiting for me at my destination, the wild birds. They will ruffle their feathers against my thoughts as I walk home against a flat sky.
Really?
Do you have wild birds too?
Yeah, I always think of them taking stuff out of my mouth. Not on the train. Yeah. Just, wow.
Yeah, the wild birds, they're out there. They're out there, guys.
Yeah. They're out there.
I like that. And
paying attention to it, right?
Yeah, and again, a progression.
Yeah.
Like I'm very technical in the way the poems are, the way they operate and how they are structured for us. And both of those, we go through a journey. Yeah. And we see them kind of vanish at the beginning, but they will be back again at the end.
And is that the progression that you go through in life, is that you take notice of things and then you stop, but then they're back? Because as I was going through that, like, I was transported back to my own train journey, which I don't do very often. And it's like the things that I notice at the start and the things that I notice at the end, but kind of like that blank period in between where I'm just so much in my thought that I never pay attention to anything. And so I felt like that was the experience for me through that poem.
And this tension that I see between this natural, free, kind of unrestrained nature versus this machination of industry and city
that takes over, right?
That
takes over. You're drowned.
That makes it difficult to actually appreciate that beauty all around us.
Yeah, I like those thoughts, guys. I'm going to write another poem now.
I think I'm onto something with this.
But there's also the dark things. There's the dark things too that we have to let go of sometimes and let the light in too. So you can flip it around.
Yeah, the wild things are not what you want.
Well, they might not be.
Yeah.
Which way is it?
It's a bit Escher, isn't it?
That's the observer effect, right?
Exactly. How we go through life and the things that we notice. Do we notice them at the start of the journey? Do we notice them at the end of the journey? Do they disappear? Are they there?
Yeah.
What impact do they have? And so that leaves me hunger for more, right? I'm just going more and more and more. And that's what I was saying about that storytelling. I'm like, I want more.
But Tammy, a poem has to end.
I know, but that's why I think as poets, right, one of the things we need to do is how to sequel our poetry like they do in the movies and other things. Maybe I'm putting it out there.
It's a taste.
There's a paper we could write.
Now we're talking. Like, I often think that it's really hard to write poetry because you're trying to capture so much with so little time, so little space. It is. That's what it is. Economy. Never thought of it that way before. But the economical story, that tries to tell these big ideas that use so few words to do it. And maybe the sequel method might be, or can we start another method?
I'm not sure, Tammy. I think the purpose of it is to keep it short.
I'm changing the whole discipline. But hey, it wouldn't be me if I didn't try to do that.
And I think there's something beautiful in that, in leaving you wanting more.
Yeah.
I think like, if I think of a lot of the poems that have resonated with me, it's because I just want to have one more stanza.
Yeah.
I just want to hear that voice one more time. I just want to feel that, like, what would it be in this situation? But that poem was enough to get it out and get it started, and then hopefully can create its own life.
So in my early years of writing, I would take someone's poem and I would then give my rendition of it. That's how I started writing poetry.
That's great.
Is that I would do that.
Poetic emulation.
Absolutely. And I just felt like I wanted more, and so they wouldn't give it to me, so I'd give it to myself. Lots of satisfaction doing that. But I love it, because then that experience is now personalized.
Yeah, no, it's
very
great.
Much so.
Well, there have been lots of people who've written sequels to classic novels as well. You
absolutely.
know, it's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a big thing in tertiary and secondary schools. Like for any curriculum, if they've read a book, sometimes they're asked to write the next chapter.
Yeah.
Or
start with this line.
Or write a poem from this character's point of view, you know? So that's very much an active part of understanding thought and creativity and style is responding back.
I went to a workshop once where you were given, you were allowed to choose the first line from someone else's poem as the first line of your poem, and you write your poem and then you take that line away as a sort of a prompt for writing a poem. And I think that's quite a fun thing to try.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to try that. You've got to give me a line.
But you can choose whichever one appeals to you, you know, as a starting point about what you want to write about.
So
I can give you one if you want.
Please do.
But...
I love your work.
I'll pick you one later.
Pick me one later and I'll do it. Because I'm always looking at trialing new things, and I tend to be, quite frankly, prose is really hard for me to navigate.
Yeah.
Just because structurally, like, I'm more into the stanzas in a certain way, and it's have a certain style, and I need to break out of that. So I actually need the prompting. I need to break out of that because I can see the freedom that comes with other forms, and I've never given myself permission. So, permission granted.
You are free.
I'm free. I'm free.
You're free to play. Yeah. That's great.
And I've now been invited. I have someone to play with.
There you go. There you go.
Definitely. That would be fun.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Jane, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your poetry with us, and just exactly what poetry has done for you, and how you have that little corner that just keeps you sane in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
Keeps you grounded.
You. Thanks so much to you both for having me on the show. It's been really fun. And, I've particularly, enjoyed this conversation. It's taken some really interesting twists and turns. Look forward to talking to you both more in the future about poetry.
We would love that.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back. So, I think this is the group that can grow, and we can all get there together. I have to say that this makes my week, right?
Oh, thanks, Tammy.
It does make my
It
week,
makes mine as well. I've got to say, it's the most fun thing in the whole week.
Probably the whole semester.
Yeah.
For me, at least. But I love talking. I love talking about poetry and what it does, because there's something that it just lightens my soul. It just makes me so much a better human being. So,
yeah,
makes it all worthwhile.
It does. It does. And thanks for sharing. Really, really, really appreciate it.
It's a real love of mine. So it's a labor of love to be here talking about it. Thanks so much.
Oh, wonderful. And thank you all for joining us. And we will see you next time on Life Inspired by Poetry.
Thanks again.
Bye.